You're listening to the Seahawks Insiders.
Geno looks, going to lay it up over the top. Got a man out there. It is Lockett. He has got it. Touchdown, Seahawks.
Getting you ready for Seahawks football every Sunday.
Hurts drops back, has time, loads up, throws. A.J. Brown, the defense. It's intercepted. Does he keep his feet in? He does. Seahawks ball.
Presented by Delta, the official airline of the Seahawks. Now, here's your host, Jen Mueller.
I don't usually enjoy a short week. That's because it's truncated for all of us. But John Boyle, I think that I am looking forward to this Thursday night game in particular because it gives the Seahawks a chance to get right back to work and hopefully wipe the slate clean after the last couple of games.
Yeah, for sure. It's it's kind of a cliche in football, but sometimes you just want to get back on the field quickly. We've heard players talk about just get that bad taste out of your mouth because, that was not a very fun one on Sunday against the Giants. So try to get it right in a hurry.
Well, and it is tough, right? I don't want to minimize what's happening with their bodies, with the schedule. You're playing 3 games in a really short amount of time. And I know that it's not an excuse. It is just the reality of the situation. My body doesn't feel great coming out of this week's game, and I'm not the one that was getting hit on the sidelines the entire time. And I do think you could tell some of that fatigue factor, whether that was mental fatigue or physical fatigue, that was starting to show up Sunday against the Giants.
Yeah, especially defensively, it's just they didn't come out looking like themselves. It just didn't, it was sloppier. They were missing some tackles. And, look, it's long season. Teams are going to have bad games. It's how do you respond to that and how do you fix those issues so they don't become a long-term problem?
Well, and before we ask how to do that, I will point out that because the league has added that second Thursday game, this is going to happen to more and more teams. In fact, 10 teams this year are going to face a similar turnaround. 7 teams will play 4 games in the span of 17 days. Right now, tough. Seattle's just 3-11, but you benefit from that little mini bye, which I think is just going to feel like a much-needed break by the time they get there. But that is what the Seahawks are facing, and Mike Macdonald pointed out this week, look, if you want to be a good team, you are going to play primetime games. So figure it out and figure out how to deal with it. I think what you're also seeing, though, in addition to just funky scheduling and trying to figure out what works with practice, I think you're also figuring out how you want to communicate things on both sides of the ball. You're still trying to figure out what your identity is. As Mike Macdonald said before week 1, we don't know what our fastball is yet. We're still looking for that. And I think 5 games in, John, we're still trying to figure out what that is.
Yeah. I mean, they have ideas of what they want to be, but they've not yet really consistently found it. I mean, they look great on defense for a few games. They've had a few setbacks. They've, I think probably the most consistent thing they've done is Geno Smith throwing the ball. They've been good at that, but it has not been, they've shown the ability to do just about everything well in spurts. It's putting it all together right now.
Yeah, how much of Seattle relied on Geno Smith in the passing game? Well, he is averaging 293 yards a game. That is the most. He has thrown for the most yards of any quarterback in the NFL. And I'm not sure they wanted to continue that way, but boy, Geno Smith has certainly made a great first impression on this new coaching staff.
Geno is a big bright spot on our football team right now. He's galvanizing force. The guy's competing his tail off, doing a lot of great things. So let's keep it going. I mean, we're 5 games in. It's we got a long way to go. But the good news is we got another game here to make it right and have Geno take a next step in his game, and we expect him to do so. So we're gonna be leaning on him.
Yeah, what Geno Smith's doing right now, he's not maybe getting quite the attention he should. Maybe it's because the touchdowns haven't been there, and they're 3-2 instead of 4-1. They're 5-0 or something, but to lead the league in attempts and yardage and still be completing 70, whatever it is, 2% of his passes, like that is very rare stuff he's doing, and he's doing it without much of a run game right now. He's getting pressured. The pressure rates are pretty high, so there's a lot of things working against him, and he's still been phenomenal.
I will also say this week that might not be your best strategy against the Niners. Given what their defense can do right now, they have tallied 25 passes defense this season. That is tied for 3rd most in the NFL. Having said that, Mike Macdonald knows that the Seahawks need to run the ball more. John, this is the question that everybody is trying to answer. Why is it so difficult to get the run game going? And to be fair, it's not just this year that we have seen this challenge.
No, I mean, it can depend so much on how a team's defending you. I mean, look, everyone says run the ball, but if there's a heavy box and you go 1 yard run, 2 yard run, it's 3rd and 7, like that's a hard way to function. So, both play caller and quarterback will look at what the defense is giving you and make adjustments. So sometimes you throw more than you planned based on a defense. And then there's other just weird game situations. Last week, the offense barely had the ball in the first half just because of how well the Giants were driving the ball. So you just didn't really have time. In the Detroit game a week before, it was like first half, why aren't they running? Why aren't they running? Second half, they got it going. And maybe that was kind of the hope last week, and then they fall behind and kind of have to abandon it. So it can be game situation, opponent-driven, all sorts of different things. But regardless, as Mike McDonald said a couple of times, they know they need to run it more. Everyone does.
And there is this fine balance of taking what the defense gives you, right? So if the defense is going to give you some of those open shots, sure, take advantage, but then getting back to something that is more sustainable. The problem now is everybody knows Seattle needs to run the ball more.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Mike McDonald said was, our opponents know we need to run the ball more.
Yeah, and that's part of it. And one play I really liked that wasn't a run play was first play of the second half. We're all thinking they need to run the ball. They barely ran it, and I'm sure that that's what the Giants were playing. So the first play of the second half was play action. We saw the Giants bite on it, and Tyler Lockett was open downfield for a big gain. So, you don't necessarily need to run the ball a ton this week, but, at least put the threat of it out there.
Right. And what I would say is Geno Smith cannot be your leading rusher. And that is what happened on Sunday, right? Yep. Like, that can't happen. To be fair, 33 of those yards of his 75 came on one play. The other part of that is Ken Walker was involved in that game. You did not have as many yards rushing, but he was one of the top targets for some of those little, kind of dink and dunk passes, which I get. We've talked about that before. You use that just a little bit to try to set something else up. It is tough if you are not getting push up front, and that Giants defensive line is really tough, right? I think a lot of people overlook the Giants. I'm not saying the team did. I think you overlook that team because we don't see them as much. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get anything going right there. And if you miss an assignment, that was your one chance for the drive, right?
Yeah. No, we heard that from Ryan Grubb before the game of that might be the most complete defensive line they've seen yet this year. So it was not going to be easy to run the ball against them. And again, you can't just run into a wall if there's nothing there. But some way or another, they got to take a little bit of heat off Geno Smith.
Well, and I would say they've got to find a way to keep the offense off the field, and the defense has to get some of those stops. Look, when you look at the last two games, there are definitely similarities. This is across both sides of the ball, but I do think that you look a little bit more on defense for some of those explosive plays, and this is what Mike McDonald has seen.
Well, there's plays that we need to make that we're not making, and how do you fix that? I think you just got to keep chasing it and keep working and keep putting yourself in positions in practice, communicating and walk through and take advantage of all these reps that we get throughout the week and maximize these reps. There's no other way to do it. You can't just throw the guys out there and put them in the same situation without having practiced it and expect them to do anything different. That's going on the definition of insanity there. So we're going to continue to look at our process and keep refining those and making it better, and the players are going to be bought in on it as well, and off we go.
Another comment, the phrase he used, he's talking about the run defense specifically, but he's like, it's all 11 guys, and that's where, this is true of anything in football, but playing defense, especially, a scheme like Mike McDonald's, it's, it doesn't take much for something really good to all of a sudden have some holes come up in it, so it's tough in a short week. They only have a few days to do it, but they just got to get, they're not as far off as the numbers might indicate, but you just got to, get those one or two plays where one thing goes wrong and a big play gets out. You got to clean that up, and I think we could see it start to look better in a hurry.
Yeah, and Mike McDonald actually said quick decisions have already been made this week, right? Yeah. Whether that is simplifying things, whether that is making changes to whatever your game plan is, they're not dinking around until game day. They have already made some decisions to make sure that there's clear communication. I will say from the sideline vantage point on Sunday, you could tell that they were making in-game adjustments, and part of that was communication. 12s, you did a heck of a job on Sunday. Mm-hmm. I'm going to need that again on Thursday. There is a sense that this is still a feeling out process as compared to in San Francisco, where the consternation level is really high, but for a very different reason, right? Yeah. after a 3-0 start, Seattle fans expect it to keep rising. We knew that there was going to be bumps in the road. Meanwhile, San Francisco, they've blown double-digit leads in the fourth quarter twice in the last 3 weeks. Like, they are frustrated for an entirely different reason.
Yeah, and I think there you have a team coming off a Super Bowl appearance and all these NFC Championship game appearances of, like, the standard there is, they're looking at, okay, we got to get over the hump and get that Super Bowl. Not the Seahawks don't also have high expectations, but it's a little different when you're, feeling out a new coaching staff. And as you said, it's 3-0 start kind of changes the way everyone looks at it, but like there's no way to put entirely new schemes in on both sides of the ball without there being some growing pains. Now, you hope you can win through some of those growing pains and still have a good season, but this is not the finished product by any means.
No. And when you talk about that run defense, it has to get better in a hurry. They've allowed more than 100 yards rushing in 3 of 5 games. And in 2 of those games, it's been 175 or more. And that just can't happen. You look at the Niners, no Christian McCaffrey. They do, however, have Jordan Mason, who is averaging over 100 yards a game.
Yeah, and probably the best running scheme in football with what Shanahan's put in there that, it's evolved over the years, but what they do is, a lot of guys have run well in that scheme, and not to diminish what each individual guy accomplishes, but it's a tough scheme no matter who's back there.
And my question is actually, do we know what to expect with this 49ers team? And I don't just mean scheme-wise, I mean in general. But here's what Mike McDonald can expect from Kyle Shanahan.
Well, it continues to evolve, so you can't just play the plays that you've seen. And they do a great job of utilizing their personnel. The quarterback operates really quickly. He's extending plays a little bit more this year, but it's a physical unit. It's a precise unit, and they do a great job.
We've seen that offense thrive with different quarterbacks, different runners, different pass catchers. Obviously, they're at their best when they have all their weapons, and right now they are beat up a little bit, and as are the Seahawks in some spots. But there's a reason there's so many teams around the NFL running some version of a Shanahan scheme right now. Like, it works really well.
But he started to change that scheme a little bit.
Oh, for sure.
Last year.
I mean, you have to evolve. Because
right.
It's the same conversation we used to have about the Seahawks defensive scheme. Like, once you have success with something and it proliferates around the league, that means all these other teams are learning the rules of that scheme, how to practice against it, how to beat it. And so if you don't adjust, then there's going to be all these coaches around the league like, oh, yeah, we brought that with us. We know how to defend it now. So you've got to adjust, and they've done a pretty good job of that.
For as good as that run game is, did you realize that Brock Purdy has the 3rd most passing yards in the NFL?
I didn't know his 3rd, but I knew he was up there. He's
right up there with Geno.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that far off. I mean, Geno's far and away the leader, but he is right there on that one. You know what else they don't do? They do not go 3 and out. This stat is going to blow your mind,
Ooh,
John.
I can't wait.
Yeah. Just 4 3 and outs this year for the 49ers offense. They've had 48 drives. That, to me, is pretty amazing, especially when you consider there's no Christian McCaffrey. Kittle has been hurt for part of it. They haven't had all their weapons. Debo hasn't found the end zone. Ayuk hasn't found the end zone yet. Like, they're dealing with a number of injuries, and they still have managed to stay on the field and move the ball.
Mind blown, Jen.
Well, here's the other mind-blowing stat.
Oh,
thank you for acknowledging. So they can move the ball. They're great at that. They're not great at scoring in the red zone.
Yeah.
This has been a huge
30th
problem.
in the NFL and touchdowns in the red zone.
Which you would think that's where a Christian McCaffrey would have come in.
Yeah, you're definitely missing him there probably more than anywhere.
Are we seeing I'm not even going to say scheme from the Seahawks in the red zone? Are we seeing what we need to see from the Hawks in the red zone? And I do think Sunday skewed it just a little bit because of fatigue.
Yeah, statistically they're still pretty good. The Detroit game bumped them down. The first 3 games they were really good in the red zone. We saw those, multiple times they had turnovers where their defense was put in a bad spot and they got quick stops. So overall, I really like what we've seen from that group, both in terms of like schematic stuff they've done and then just also the fight. Like when you do what they did on the goal line last week, that's a lot of that's just effort. It's just that will. We always hear the term like defend every blade of grass, and that's. When you're getting a 3rd and 1 stuff at the 1 and then you're knocking the ball out right as he's going into the end zone, that's just good effort. And, that can carry you a long way, especially in the red zone.
Yeah, so last week the Niners just 1 touchdown on 6 drives inside Arizona's 10, which highlights their goal to go situations have been terrible. Last year, I mean, they were money. They were best in the league at being able to punch it in. This year, they are 31st in the league. They have scored touchdowns on just 6 of their 12 opportunities. Yes, I know that goes hand in hand with red zone, but again, you're getting inside the 10, and you can't punch it in. And oh, by the way, you just signed a kicker off the street this week because you're missing the kicker. And we rarely talk about kickers, and probably for good reason, because if you're talking about them, they're probably not excelling at something that they should be excelling at. I do think that might change the strategy just a little bit this week for the Niners.
It's a little easier when they sign a kicker this week and they'll have someone, presumably healthy. It's a little tougher when that happens to you in game like it did, and you're debating between, is our punter going to kick? Are we going to go for it every time? I think at one point
Wisnowski.
Yeah, I think at one point Juszczyk, their fullback, was kicking.
Yes,
working on some kicks into the net. So obviously, if you're signing a guy off the street versus your regular kicker, you might have a little less confidence, but you would hope somebody you bring in can get the job done to where you're not forcing bad decisions. But we sort of don't, you kind of take for granted, like, you got a good kicker, you're going to make these kicks. And when that guy goes down, it mucks things up pretty badly.
Well, and I would say this, it is not just about your accuracy on your own. This is a unit, and the Seahawks have certainly seen that in the last week, right? It's not just about plug and play another kicker. There is a timing mechanism involved. There is familiarity that needs to get built up. And in case you guys are following this kicker news coming out of San Francisco, they have in fact signed Matthew Wright, who has been with 4 teams over his, 5-year career, because he came in 2019. Yep, I did a deep dive on this. He spent 5 days.
I'm just going to go with what you're saying. You could be completely making this up, and I could not correct you.
It's written on my notepad. I know exactly what I'm talking about.
I'm trusting you.
Yeah, spent 5 days with the 49ers last year, so they know him a little bit. Career, he is 40 of 47 on field goals. He is 35 of 37 for extra points, just in case that affects anybody's fantasy football. Speaking
I see what you're doing, Jen.
Speaking of John Boyle, we don't have Scott Engel today. We do have notes from Scott Engel for our fantasy football players.
Yes, I need to make it very clear that I am not giving you fantasy advice.
Everybody
right now.
email John
no
for fantasy advice.
This is me reading to you.
Are you reading it verbatim, or are you taking some liberties?
I am taking no liberties because Scott is the expert here, and me taking liberties, things will get lost.
Things are going to get bad. Okay.
So,
all right.
From Scott, not from me.
From Scott. What do we got?
Keep Kenneth Walker III in your lineups. He says the 49ers rank 14th in fantasy points allowed per game to running backs. Maybe a little bounce back for Kenneth Walker.
I like this. All
right. He says start Green Bay's Dontavian Wicks. He has 20 targets over the past 2 games. All right. We'll go with that. I like Scott there. All right. He says start Dak Prescott. Dallas Cowboys quarterback is 2nd in the league in pass attempts and yardage behind... Come on, we just talked about
Geno Smith.
Thank you. All right.
It was a dramatic pause.
Lastly, we need to remind you, you can find more of Scott's work at rotoballer.com and also on The Athletic.
That is high-quality script reading right there. Sign you up for teleprompters, for script reading, for VOs. You've got this down.
All right, if you say so. You're the expert.
Okay, so if we are talking about Ken Walker staying in the lineup for the Seahawks, here's another kind of interesting thing from the 49ers. They are blitzing I take that back. They are blitzing a decent amount, and opponents are completing 67% of their passes when the Niners blitz. Their allowed passer rating is 150.2.
Wow.
That is the worst in the league.
Okay.
That surprises me from a Niners defense.
Yeah.
Does it surprise you?
It does, because they've been so good at just about everything on defense. So, I mean, I know I haven't done the deep dive into them, but I just know from what you read and what you hear that their defense has not been up to the high standard that's been set there in recent years. So
they have a new defensive coordinator, and
they've had to. I mean, because 2 years ago they lose Ryan's head coaching job, they changed coordinators, and they decided to make a change against us. That's tough when you're changing over coordinators 3 times in 3 years.
Well, and we know that defensive coordinator. He was with us for a bit. He'd also been in San Francisco for a couple of years. I do think it's different when you call a defense yourself.
Yeah.
We also know one of their coaches over there, KJ, right?
We
Another
do.
one of ours. Yep.
Still weird to see him in that color.
I want to see him, and I would like for him to have a different sweatshirt on. And something tells me he's not allowed to wear anything other than a 49ers.
Hand him a nice Seahawks throwback
right.
sweatshirt.
Oh, gosh. That would be so great.
Yes.
Just say, KJ, I got a little something for you here.
Yep.
What do you think would happen to that sweatshirt?
I
think he would
probably
wear
just very politely have to hand it back to you.
No.
He couldn't be seen on the field taking it. That would get him in trouble.
Well, he wouldn't unbox it on the field.
Okay. You know, wrap it up and keep it.
Right,
okay.
right.
He'll wear it at home when no cameras are around.
When there's zero people watching. Never out of the house when there's zero people watching. KJ, we miss you. I will look forward to seeing you on the sidelines, but I think that your color is blue.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, I think your color
Decade in blue. That's
is
his
blue.
color. Yep.
I keep coming back to this, but John, do we actually know what to expect from this Niners team? And I say that because I don't know that history matters right now. Shanahan said history doesn't matter at all when they've gotten off to slow starts and have to figure out a way to rebound.
Yeah.
Mike McDonald looks totally different, even though with the Ravens, he managed to beat Shanahan, faced him a number of times.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have a clear expectation for Thursday night.
Because for the longest time, we'd look at, Shanahan versus Carroll and these schemes and how they've matched up. And for a long time, the Seahawks dominated that series. And then the tide obviously shifted in recent years. You can kind of look at how he's done against the Mike McDonald scheme, but totally different players, different teams. So, yeah, I mean, there's so much change for both these teams, both roster-wise. We just talked about a new coordinator for the 49ers. So, yeah, I don't have a great feel for how this game's going to play out, other than I'd be pretty shocked if it isn't a pretty exciting, down-to-the-wire type deal.
Yeah, and if we go back to some of those numbers for the Ravens last year, they did come away with a win. It was on Monday Night Football. The final score was 33-19, but San Francisco posted over 400 yards of offense. Well, so that's kind of interesting, and I think some of that came late in the game when they were rallying.
Yeah, you're coming back.
But I think a win in this game, and I know this sounds stupid, right? It's the final score. Mm-hmm. But I don't think you look at some of those other categories. For example, if the run game gets going for the Niners, that's fine. Just take Brock Purdy out of the equation, right? I'm okay if there's one column that's skewed. Yeah. You just can't give up big plays in the middle of the field, as we've seen far too often, right?
And
are we in agreement with this?
I am, and also it helped to do what the Ravens did last year and get a bunch of takeaways.
And it is possible because San Francisco has turned the ball over 8 times already this year. I like that. Ooh, I think that's going to play into the things that I need to see from you. But right now, we've got to take a break and hear a word from our presenting sponsor.
Statistically, the world is losing color. Just consider all-white kitchens, beige baby nurseries, a sea of gray cars. But in the hundreds of destinations Delta flies to, you can rediscover color in the bright blue waters of Hawaii, the emerald green hills of Scotland, the berry pink cherry blossoms of Tokyo, and so much more. Sometimes opening your world is all it takes to open your mind, which is why when you fly Delta, your potential takes off when you do. Delta, official airline of the Seattle Seahawks.
Okay, John, I gave you a little extra time. I also have one correction. I said Brock Purdy had the 3rd most yards in the league. He's actually got the 4th most yards in the league. 275 passing yards a game. I know. I just wanted to correct that before somebody said, you were right. You're right. I was wrong. I was wrong on that one. I'm not going to be wrong on what I want to see, though.
Okay.
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I want to let you go first, because I usually get to, and that's, it's not fair to you, Jen.
I think that's because he's still thinking about what he wants to
No,
see.
I already got one of them. I just want
Okay. All right. Well, here's what I'm going to say. That defense, I want to see them force a 3 and out. We brought up that stat. I think it's amazing. They've only had 4, but I think from the defensive standpoint, it has nothing to do with the Niners have done already this year. They need that as a confidence boost. They need that to get off the field. They need that to show that all of those reps that they've taken, whether it be in walkthrough or practice this week, have been intentional and exactly what Mike McDonald wants. So I need to see a 3 and out from the defense. You're probably going to have this one too, over 100 yards rushing. You've got to get that. In fact, I'm going to say as a team, you probably need 125.
See, I'm going to differ from you a little bit there. I more need the threat of the run.
To
kind of keep that defense honest. So, run the ball and get it going. That'd be great. But, even if the yards aren't there, get a few carries early. And then I want to see, some more play action, some more Geno under center, just to really keep them a little off balance, maybe. And then on the other side of the ball, we talked about it last week too, but I want the takeaways. We saw from Mike McDonald, that was the big difference against the 49ers last year. We saw that was an early game-changing moment for this defense. Unfortunately, it didn't really sustain it, but get some of those takeaways. As good as Purdy is, he's a gutsy quarterback, which has served him very well, but it also leads to him taking some risks sometimes. So capitalize on some of those.
Yeah, and when you talk about the threat of the run game, we didn't even mention their defensive players. Fred Warner leads the team in tackles. Nick Bosa with 3 sacks fills up the entire stat sheet. Yeah, and Kevin Givens actually leads the team with 3.5 sacks. So I think balance is probably what we're looking for. If we had to distill that down to one word, how about balance on offense?
Love it.
How about a win on Thursday so that we can enjoy a few extra days off? And I promise after that short break, we will be back with you for another edition of the Seahawks Insiders Podcast.